Welcome to Verbal Pick Radio, where we give you a verbal image of life, and we are everyday people. Like to welcome you all to the show. We're not concluding because Black History is 365, but we're coming to the conclusion of works that we've been doing for the past month and a half, dealing with the Moors, the slaves, going back to Ganga Zumba in Brazil. We did that. We talked about the Portuguese. We talked about the Moors in Spain. Now we coming over to America now. And we're dealing with the early history of Muslims in America. Now, some of this is coming from Aeon, and that is AEON. They come out with content, knowledge, certain things that we deem as being hidden, and they like to bring it to the light. And so I'm going to read some of this to you all, just to give you a view on or catch up on what we've been talking about for over the past month and a half. Now, this is dedicated to Omar ibn Said. The term in English as you use this is said. It's actually it's an Arabic term of Said, S-A-I-D. Ibn means son of, so it could be Omar, son of Said, or sometimes you'll see B-E-N, Ben. That's also son of. So it's Omar ibn Said or Omar, son of Said, right? It says Omar ibn Said's autobiography is the only known extant autobiography of a slave written in Arabic in America. It was not edited by his owner as those of other slaves written in English were, and is therefore surmised to be more authentic. It also attests to the high level of education that existed in Africa at the time, and also reveals that many Africans who were brought to the United States as slaves were followers of Islam. That's public domain. That's in the Bernanke Library at Yale University. It goes on. The first words to pass between Europeans and Americans, one-sided and confusing as they must have been, were in the sacred language of Islam. Now, let's break that down. See, at the time, Muslims coming to America, but prior to that, they were forced to accept Christianity. The Jews also. So some changed their name, some went into hiding, but and secretly, they were still practicing Islam. Although they were slaves, although they were going through this brutal treatment in the Americas, and although they had to accept a new religion by force, but secretly in their home, they were still practicing Islam. It never stopped. Okay, Christopher Columbus had hoped to sail to Asia and had prepared to communicate at its great courts in one of the major languages of Eurasian commerce. See where it says Eurasian commerce? Because at the time, the whole planet at one time was called Eurasia. So when Columbus' interpreter, a Spanish Jew, spoke to the Taino of Hispaniola, and you got Taino people tribes in Puerto Rico to this day. The Taino of Hispaniola, he did so in Arabic. And we get to that. Not just the language of Islam, but the religion itself likely arrived in America in 1492, more than 20 years before Martin Luther nailed his thesis to the door, igniting the Protestant Reformation. But now, look, Islam was in America before 1492, but we continue reading. Moors, African and Arab Muslims, they were black, had conquered much of the Iberian Peninsula in 1711, establishing a Muslim culture that lasted nearly 8 centuries. By early 1492, the Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella completed the Reconquista, defeating the last of the Muslim kingdoms in Granada. By the end of the century, the Inquisition, which had begun a century earlier, had coursed between 300,000 and 800,000 Muslims and probably at least 70,000 Jews. They coerced them, forced them to convert to Christianity. Spanish Catholics often suspected these Moriscos or conversos of practicing Islam or Judaism in secret, and the Inquisition pursued and persecuted them. Some almost certainly sailed in Columbus' crew, carrying Islam to their hearts and minds, meaning those who came to the Americas with Columbus, they brought Islam with them. Why? Because Christopher Columbus was half black, and two, the Muslims knew how to travel and how to follow that North Star. 8 centuries of Muslim rule left a deep cultural legacy on Spain. One evident in clear and sometimes surprising ways during the Spanish conquest of the Americas, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, Chronicler, the chronicler of Hernan Cortes' conquest of Mesoamerica, admired the costumes. Now listen to this. Admired the costumes of native women dancers by writing muy buen vestidas e su manera y que parecían moriscas. It interprets very well dressed in their own way and seemed like Moorish women. This Cortes, now mind you, this is Cortes when he got to the Americas. To refer to the Native American religious sites traveling through Anahuac, today's Texas and Mexico, Cortes reported that he saw more than 400 mosques. Right? Look, Cortes now, he reporting. This the Cortes coming to the Americas, Montezuma, the whole conquistadors and whatnot. He's saying when he got to the Americas, he saw over 400 mosques. Right. Islam served as a kind of blueprint or algorithm for the Spanish in the New World. As they encountered people and things new to them, they turned to Islam to try to understand what they were seeing, what was happening. Even the name California might have some Arabic lineage. The Spanish gave the name in 1535, taking it from the deeds of Esplandian, 1510, a romance novel popular with the conquistadors. The novel features a rich island, California, ruled by black Amazonians and their queen, Califia. The deeds of Esplandian had been published in Seville, a city that had for centuries been part of the Umayyad Caliphate, Califia, California. Islam, all throughout. This is black history. This is part of black history. But look, go back and research it. Across the Western Hemisphere, whenever they arrived at the new land or encountered native peoples, Spanish conquistadors read the Requerimiento, a stylist legal pronouncement. In essence, it announced a new state of society offering Native Americans the chance to convert to Christianity and submit to Spanish rule, or else bear responsibility for all the debts and losses that would follow. A formal and public announcement of the intent to conquer included an offer to the faithless a chance to submit and become believers is the first formal requirement of jihad. Following centuries of war with the Muslims, the Spanish had adopted this practice, Christianized it, called it the Requerimiento, and took it to the America. Iberian Christians might have thought Islam wrong. Well, Iberian Christians might have thought Islam wrong. I guess that's how they said it. or even diabolical, but they also knew it well. If they thought it strange, it must be counted a very familiar strange. By 1503, we know that Muslims themselves from West Africa were in the New World in that year. Hispaniola royal governor wrote to Isabella requesting that she curtail their importation. They were, he wrote, a source of scandal to the Indians. They had, he wrote, repeatedly fled their owners on Christmas morning, 1522, in the New World's first slave rebellion. 20 Hispaniola sugar mill slaves rose and began slaughtering Spaniards. Now, come on, look, y'all hearing what they saying? Let me read that again. On Christmas morning in 1522 in the New World's first slave rebellion, 20 Hispaniola sugar mill slaves. Now, when they said 20 Hispaniola, meaning 20 Moors, Hispanic Moors, that were slaves, rose and began slaughtering Spaniards, meaning, now this is where we are today. You got, say, blacks in Veracruz, you got black native Hispaniolas who were Muslims, but are being, how they call them, Moranos or Morascos or Moors, who are still battling the European Spaniard mindset. The European Spaniard mindset is racist towards the indigenous Hispaniola or Moors. They know the bloodline, and that's one of the fights that's going on to this day as far as racism in the in Mexico or in the Spanish community, because we all know, blacks know. And you that listening that are Spanish, you know how your parents tell you don't befriend the American blacks when you come to this country. Stay away from the blacks in America. Although your grandmother and your grandfather is black and your great grandparents is black. I mean, we know the whole game. I mean, hell, everything's out in the open, man. Cat out the bag, you know. Okay, now. The rebels, the governor noted, were mostly Wolof, a Sengambian people, many of whom have been Muslim since the 11th century. Muslims were more likely than other enslaved Africans to be illiterate, an ability rarely looked upon with favor by plantation owners. See, the plantation owners didn't like the Muslims because the Muslims were literate. That's why you see in Roots they beating Kunta Kinte to dumb him down and give him a slave name or a dumbed down name of Toby. Toby's a dumbed down name. Kunta Kinte is a name of meaning. So now you all understand that. In the 5 decades following the 1522 slave rebellion on Hispaniola, Spain issued 5 decrees prohibiting the importation of Muslim slaves. Muslims thus arrived in America more than a century before the Virginia Company founded the Jamestown Colony in 1607. Muslims came to America more than a century before the Puritans founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. Muslims were living in America not only before Protestants, but before Protestantism existed. After Catholicism, Islam was the second monotheistic religion in the Americas. Now, hold on, I'm going to stop there before I get to the next part. All that was true. So over the years, they worked to condemn Islam. They worked to make Islam non-existent. For a short period in America's history, there was no talk of Islam until the early 1900s, and mainly when Masfarad Muhammad came and raised up the army of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, it started picking back up again. You know, but it was, the pulse, I could say, was almost depleted, but it was still beeping, and it rose again, and it's rising again. The popular misunderstanding, even among educated people, that Islam and Muslims are recent additions to America tell us important things about how American history has been written. In particular, it reveals how historians have justified and celebrated the emergence of the modern nation state. One way to prove this, right? The United States of America has been to minimize the heterogeneity and scale, the cosmopolitanism, diversity, and mutual coexistence of peoples in America during the first 300 years of European presence. So the first 300 years of European presence was really spent on eradicating Islam out of America. They didn't want blacks to know who they were. They didn't want it to exist. They did everything to cover it up, from even giving a white Jesus, from preaching a white version of Christianity, the whole nine. But I must say, it did work on some. They were successful in their endeavors, because we still in 2020 trying to get that cloak of colonialism religion off the minds and backs of the ex-slaves, the Aboriginal, the Native Black Americans in America. Still trying to fight it. The past is those bits and pieces of history that a society selects in order to sanction itself. The writing of American history has also been dominated by Puritan institutions. It might no longer be quite true, as a historian and Southerner, U.B. Phillips complained more than 100 years ago that Boston had written the history of the U.S. and largely written it wrong. But when it comes to the history of religion in America, the consequences of the domination of the leading Puritan institution in Boston, Harvard University, and New Haven, Yale University, remain formidable. This prudent effect on seeing and understanding religion in early America and the origins of the U.S. brings real distortion, as though we were to turn the political history of 20th century Europe over to the Trotskys. Wow. Or the Trotskyites. Think of history as the depth of breadth of human experience as what actually happened. History makes the world or a place and people what it is or what they are. In contrast, think of the past as those bits and pieces of history that a society selects in order to sanction itself, to affirm its forms of government, its institutions, and dominant morals. Meaning, some created a false narrative or created a history to justify its existence, or things that some will do to prove that, well, this is the reason why we are doing this, because history tells us to, history forbids it, or history agrees to it. So that's why who has the power of the pen has the power to produce the history if it goes unchallenged. So that's another reason why at slavery time, blacks weren't able to read and write for those 300 and so odd years, while history was being formed out of the minds of those who were seeking to justify their wrongdoings and wrong actions. The forgetting of early American Muslims is then more than an arcane concern. The consequences bear directly on the matter of political belonging today. Nations are not mausoleums or reliquaries to concern the dead or inanimate. They are organic in that, just as they are made, they must be consistently remade, or they atrophy and die. Atrophy and die. Atrophy and die. The virtual Anglo Protestant monopoly over the history of religion in America has obscured the half a millennium presence of Muslims in America and has made it harder to see clear answers to important questions about who belongs, who is American, by what criteria, and who gets to decide. What then should America or American mean with its vast early American program? The Omohundro Institute, the leading scholarly organization of early American history, points to the one possible answer. Early America and American are big in general terms, but not so much as to be nearly meaningless. Historically, they are best understood as the Great Collision, mixing and conquest of peoples and civilizations and animals and microbes of Europe and Africa with the peoples and societies of the Western Hemisphere from the Greater Caribbean to Canada. That began in 1492. From 1492 to at least about 1800, America simply is Greater America or vast early America. Now, okay, so this new concept or this new land we call America, right? Where they would take, let's say when they say new animals that's existing or whatever, where they interbreed animals to create other animals on this land, and so they did with people as well. You had for the first time in a large mass scale, where race mixing was going on with the European, because whether the Native American Indian was black, whether the African, whether they came from West or North Africa. When we say black, we say melanated. Whether the Hispaniola natives, they were also black. If they mingled in with each other, that's just melanin on melanin. The distinction comes when melanin breeds with non-melanin and produces that child. Okay, y'all get that? Yeah, because they're not finna put that number on us today. Okay. Now, check this out. Muslims were part of Greater America from the start, including those parts of it that would become the United States. In 1527, Mustafa Zamora, an Arab Muslim from the Morocco coast. Now, Mustafa Zamora, it was Mustafa Esteban Zamora, and Esteban means little Stephen, right? We got that in Everyday People, the movie. We touch bases on that, and you can watch that docudrama on YouTube, Everyday People, the movie. Just type that in and it'll pop up. Okay, in 1527, Mustafa Zamora, an Arab Muslim from the Moroccan coast, arrived in Florida as a slave on a disastrous Spanish expedition led by Panfilo de Narvaez. Against all odds, Zamora survived and made a life for himself, traveling from the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, which he came through the Gulf of Mexico, through Galveston, through what is now the southwestern U.S. as well as Mesoamerica. He struggled through servitude to native peoples before fashioning himself into a well-known and respected medicine man. He was, when he was founded, he founded New Mexico and Arizona. Mustafa Zamora, little Stephen, they don't want to talk about him, but look him up for yourself. This is Black history. In 1542, Cabeza de Vaca, one of the 4 survivors of the Narvaez expedition, published the first European book, later known as Adventures in the Unknown Interior of America, devoted to North America. De Vaca told of disasters that befell the conquistadors and of the 80 years that the survivors spent wandering through North and Mesoamerica. De Vaca acknowledged that it was Zamora who became the indispensable one. It was, wrote De Vaca, the Negro, talking about Esteban Zamora, right? The Negro who talked to them all the time. The them were the Native Americans, and it was a more facility, meaning it was the Moors who were interpreting what the natives were saying. He could speak the language with the native language that kept the men alive and even for a time allowed them a kind of flourishing, meaning that they were speaking Arabic and he was speaking Arabic. And it saved the rest of the crew. Zamora saw far more of the present-day U.S., its lands and peoples, than any of the country's founding fathers, even any several of them combined. Lalami, Lalami, Laila Lalami captures all of this and more in her excellent novel, The Moor's Account, 2014, which follows Zamora through his childhood in Morocco, slavery in Spain, and ultimately to a mysterious end in the American Southwest. If there is such a thing as a best version of the American pioneer frontier spirit, some resonating experience of adoption and renovation that can stamp itself on a nation and peoples, it is difficult to find one who represents it better than Zamora. Now, Zamora is Zemourri. You can look him up. Between 1675 and 1700, the beginnings of the plantation society in Chesapeake allowed local slave masters to bring more than 6,000 Africans to Virginia and Maryland. Now, note that's 6,000 Africans. But before the 6,000 Africans came in slavery, you had millions of blacks that was natives that was already here. You know, it was like we were just having a family reunion under horrific situations. Okay. Now they brought 6,000 Africans to Virginia and Maryland. This boom in the trade propelled an important change in American life. In 1668, white servants in the Chesapeake had outnumbered black slaves by 5 to whoa. They weren't servants. White servants in the Chesapeake had outnumbered black slaves. They were white slaves too, working because they brought women from slavery, from the through pirating, from the Northmen or the Dutch, Ireland. Where else? Dutch, Ireland. Well, the two, if I think of the rest, I'll tell you. Though they was bringing them working in the tobacco field first. They were white women with the first slaves in America. Had white slaves in America. So let me go back. Okay. They call them servants, but they were slaves. So we read how it's supposed to go. Okay, here you go. In 1668, white slaves in the Chesapeake had outnumbered black slaves by 5 to 1. By 1700, that ratio had been reversed. Over the first 4 decades of the 18th century, more Africans came to Chesapeake. Between 1700 and 1710, growing planters' wealth led to the importation of another 8,000 enslaved Africans. By the 1730s, an addition of 2,000 slaves per year at least came to the Chesapeake. Now, let me stop right there. First of all, no, some of that's true, some of that's not. What had happened was the white slaves, when they started bringing the black slaves from Africa, they made the black slaves mate with the white slaves. The white women took the slaves since they was already enslaved, and they were the first teachers and taught the black newly slaves how to be a slave, and how they were the first teachers of slavery. Was the white slaves the first teachers of slavery to the newly come black slaves? They got to get that right. Look, they can't fool us nowadays. Okay. The American Chesapeake was transforming from a society with slaves to a slave society, which is far more unusual. In a slave society, slavery is the foundation of economic life, and the master-slave relationship serves as the exemplary social relation, a model for all others. And that's the dynamic. Okay, now y'all get it. That's the dynamic that America rested upon, was the slave master relationship. The slave master relationship formed into a government or a societal body in which how to relate, communicate, and perceive one's social status. That was the mindset. If you were gonna be a mindset, a leading mindset, or if you were going to be the master mindset or a slave mindset. And then they kept perpetuating it or throwing it further into history and creating steps, if you will, creating steps to stand on, to move forward on, to keep that. Excuse me, I'm having all kind of, but to keep that dynamic in existence. Okay, put it like that. Okay, come on. We'll keep going. The first generation of Africans brought to North America were likely to work in the fields alongside and sleep under the same roof as their owners. They also, notes historian Ira Berlin, and many thousands gone, and she went there in 1998, tended to be a eager convert to Christianity. They hoped conversion would help them secure social standing. West Africans brought during the late 17th and first half of the 18th century to work as slaves in Virginia. Maryland and the Carolinas came from different parts of Africa or from the West Indies. Bam. Okay, so they breaking it up. Slaves from West Africa was brought to Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas. Okay, we brought to Virginia, the slaves from West Africa. But from Maryland and the Carolinas, those slaves came from different parts of Africa or from the West Indies, right? Then had these earlier charter generations. They were more likely to be Muslims and much less likely to be of mixed descent. So the blacks who came to the Carolinas and Maryland, Baltimore, and all up in there, they were more than likely to be Muslims, and they wasn't mixed as with the slaves from the Virginia, because you got to remember, the West African slaves who came to Virginia blacks, they made them mix with the white slaves, and the white slaves taught them the institution of slavery, how to be, and taught them Christianity. Okay, come on. We're going to get to that. Okay. Oh, so I'm going to go back so they came from Maryland and the Carolinas, came from different parts of Africa or from the West Indies, then had these earlier charter generations. They were more likely to be Muslims and much less likely to be of mixed descent. Christian missionaries and planters in the 18th century complained that these plantation generation of slaves showed little interest in Christianity. As to see, then that goes to you today. That's why you have some blacks who don't come around me with them white folks Christianity. Why? Because they wasn't mixed with Christianity. You had some who came and they saw the horrors of it and saw how they was trying to use religion as a slave tool. That's why the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that Christianity is a slave making religion. There you go. Okay, we getting down to it. Okay, now here we go. Missionaries and planters criticized what they saw as the slaves' practice of pagan rites. Islam could, to an extent, persist on these plantations of American slave society. Similarly, between 1719 and 1731, the French took advantage of civil war in West Africa to enslave thousands, bringing almost 6,000 enslaved Africans directly to Louisiana. Most of them came from Fouta Toro, a region around the Senegal River, straddling present-day Mauritania and Senegal. Check this out. So the French, now Louisiana slaves, right? They're coming from Fouta, F-U-T-A, Toro, T-O-R-O, a region around the Senegal River, straddling present-day Mauritania, which was the Moors, Mauritania, and Senegal. There was Islam's too. Islam had reached Futa Torah in the 11th century. Ever since, Futa has been known for its scholars, jihad armies, and theocracy, including the imamate, which is imam, but imamate Futa Torah, a theocratic state that lasted from 1776 to 1861. Late 18th and early 19th century, African conflicts in the Gold Coast, what is now Ghana, and Hausaland, mostly present-day Nigeria. Also, let me go back. The late 18th and early 19th century African conflicts in the Gold Coast, what is now Ghana, and Hausaland, mostly present-day Nigeria, also reverberated in the Americas. In the former, the Asante defeated a coalition of African Muslims. In the later, the jihadists ultimately prevailed, but in the process lost many compatriots to the slave trade in the West. So what he's saying is the Asante defeated a coalition of African Muslims, right? Then later on, the jihadist Muslims ultimately prevailed against the Asante, right? But in that process, they lost many soldiers to the slave trade, and they were sent down to the West, right? So now you got more Muslims coming to the West, which was prisoners of war, and they were sent down to where? Louisiana. All right, come on. So you got Texas, Louisiana, and Mesoamerica were all black, were all Muslim before the arrival of the Spaniards. Let's get that now. Okay. Ayuba Suleiman Diallo, which is Ayuba Suleiman Diallo, is the best known Muslim of the 18th century North America. He was of the Fulbe, Fulbe, and Islamic people of West Africa as early as the 16th century. European traders enslaved many Fulbe, sending them to be sold in America. Diallo was born in Bunda, an area between the Senegal and Gambia rivers, under an Islamic theocracy. He was captured by a British slave trader in 1731 and eventually sold to Maryland, to a Maryland slave owner. An Anglican missionary recognized Diallo writing in Arabic and offered him wine to test if he was a Muslim. Later, a British lawyer who wrote an account of Diallo's enslavement and transport of Maryland anglicized his first name Ayoba to Job and his surname Suleiman to Ben Solomon. And this way, Ayoba Solomon became Job, son of Solomon, right?